Look, I am a red-blooded American. I was born in New Hampshire, love the United States, but I 100% see containment, and I 100% see what the Biden administration doing to China is wrong. It's morally wrong. He's oppressing 1.4 billion Chinese simply because they're Chinese.
This is Shaun Rein, an American who has lived in China for over 25 years. I recently had the chance to sit down with Shaun for an exclusive interview. We discuss the state of the Chinese economy and how foreign companies are now looking at China. We talk about US-China geopolitics, the effects of zero COVID, and if the Chinese people still support the Chinese government. Finally, watch to the end of the video to hear an incredible story from Shaun's recent visit to Xinjiang, where he reveals what the Chinese government is really doing to the local Uyghur families in the region. If you really want to understand what China is like in 2023, this is the interview for you to watch. Well, everybody, welcome to the beautiful Pudong district. We're here right in the heart of Lujiazui, the financial district of Shanghai, and I'm joined by Shaun Rein. Shaun.
Nice to meet you, Cyrus.
Absolutely.
Thank you for making time before you fly back to the U.S.
Absolutely. Well, we've had a whirlwind tour here in China the last few days. I've been in 5 cities in the last 7 days. I've come back to China, really wanting to see what is China like after the COVID pandemic. China was essentially cut off from the world for over 3 years. It's now reopened. The borders are open. And, for everybody, Shaun is an amazing entrepreneur here in China. You're originally from the United States. I know you've lived now longer in China than you have in the United States. And, Shaun, our goal with today is I really want to get your insights into the economy here, what is driving the future, and kind of some of your predictions for the future of China, because I know that you were here on the ground through the entire pandemic. You run a company called China Market Research Group, and so you're the man that we want to see and get these insights in. So tell us a little bit about the state of the Chinese economy in 2023.
Well, I think, Cyrus, it's great. Have you noticed a big change since you were here last?
Yeah, that's a great question. It was interesting when I came into Pudong Airport. I flew into Terminal 1, which is the internationals, and at the time I was transferred in from Seoul, Korea, and there was only 2 flights that came in. And so it was actually a very different experience. I mean, Pudong, the last time I was here, was much busier, much more lively. It seemed a lot more quiet. And then I would have to say the last few days that I have not seen as, the trains and the buses and the planes have not been as packed as you would imagine for, being in China.
And the travel sector, frankly, Cyrus, is probably doing better than just about any other sector in China today.
Right.
But outbound tourism just hasn't happened. And I think, I was in Singapore a couple weeks ago. I went to Thailand, and everybody is waiting for this great surge of Chinese travelers after 3 years traveling overseas. Right. Because in 2019, about 180 million Chinese traveled abroad.
Right.
They were the ones fueling the sales of hotels for Marriott and Hyatt.
Right.
They were the ones going to the Champs-Élysées or Fifth Avenue to buy Louis Vuitton handbags. And that hasn't happened.
Right.
And part of the reason, Cyrus, is China is normal, but it's not normal.
Right.
Only about 36% of Chinese who had passports before have passports now that can be used to go abroad.
Okay.
A lot of them expired over the last 3 years, and they just haven't had the chance to get it renewed.
Okay.
The number of flights is way down. We're only 20 Chinese airline flights a week are allowed to fly to the United States, and only 20 American airline flights a week are allowed to fly to China. That's down from 200 each.
That's right.
In 2019. So it's really expensive. Like tomorrow, I'm going to the United States for the first time since 2019. I'm flying economy.
Right.
2,500 US per ticket.
Right.
Now, that's what I normally pay about when I fly business class to the US.
Right.
So China's normal, but it's not.
Right.
And this is what's happening with the economy. If you look at it, there's several reasons why consumer confidence is down in China right now and why spending just hasn't happened. The first is in 2022, Chinese faced salary cuts, unpaid furloughs. There's weak Chinese bonuses. So a lot of investment banks like JP Morgan kept criticizing me. They kept saying, but Shaun, there's $2 trillion of household savings in China that people didn't spend during COVID because they couldn't. Why aren't they going to spend? There's going to be revenge shopping in 2023.
Right.
I told JP Morgan I disagree.
Right.
Unfortunately, I was right. Yeah. You see, retail sales have only gone up about 10.6% year on year from last month. These are terrible numbers.
Right.
Why? The Chinese don't feel like they have money. That's the first thing. Real estate is weak.
Right.
So they just feel like their overall net worths aren't there. So they're starting to save for a rainy day.
Right.
But an even bigger issue, Cyrus, is geopolitics. And this is what I've argued for years, that China's economy was weak over the last 3 years, not so much because of COVID. You saw exports still soared. China hasn't lost its manufacturing dominance.
Right.
What was weak was geopolitics. Chinese feel that the United States are trying to contain China's growth, right, destabilize the country, and perhaps overthrow the Communist Party of China.
Right.
So Chinese are saying, you know, the next 5-10 years minimum are going to be a real rough time. As soon as we become a national leader in telecom like Huawei, the US's national security threat. As soon as China becomes strong in cotton, again, 20% of the world's cotton comes from Xinjiang, the United States all of a sudden claims forced labor and genocide.
Right.
When China gets strong at solar panels, again, that comes from Xinjiang, the United States says forced labor and genocide. So there's a feeling in China amongst the everyday population that the next 10, 20 years is going to be tough geopolitically. And that's making them save for a rainy day.
Right.
And that's why you've seen over the last 5 months, the surge reopening that Wall Street predicted just hasn't happened.
Right.
Unfortunately, I was right, Cyrus.
Yeah.
The economy is much weaker than people think. I've been one of the biggest bears for the last year, right, because of the geopolitics and the weak consumer confidence.
Yeah, I think that's that was a very amazing insight there, Shaun. And I think that's something that we, being back in America, we always hear this revenge shopping, right? They always thought that, hey, once this opens up, the Chinese are going to be traveling everywhere. Everyone's going to be spending lots of money. We know the Chinese are incredible savers. Typically, just culturally speaking, they already save a lot of money. But yeah, I think you're right. I think that the Chinese, that's exactly what I've seen, is that it's just not as busy as before. It's just a little, you can kind of feel it in the air. It's just not the same China of when I was last year, 2018 and 2019, and everything was kind of on the upslope.
When Chinese go out and shop now, because they are buying Louis Vuitton and Chanel, so people thought that was heralding in that revenge spending.
Right.
But people, when they buy these things, they're buying it not out of confidence. They're shopping out of anxiety.
Right.
They're shopping because they feel depressed. So they're buying a Louis Vuitton handbag to make themselves feel a little bit better.
Okay.
They're buying exercise classes and Lululemon apparel because they want to feel better and focus on health. They're not buying because they think they're going to make more money next year,
right,
which is what would have happened in 2018, 2019.
Right.
People would buy an LV handbag to show that they had reached a certain level of success.
Right.
Now it's about depression. The next problem that I think people missed, right? You just came back, it's June.
Yeah.
Right? The border's been open for 6 months.
Right.
I just gave a speech last week to a group of Australian hedge funds. They just came back. You saw the CEOs of Starbucks, Tesla, Louis Vuitton, JP Morgan, all came back in May, June. It took them 5 months,
right,
after borders reopened.
Right.
Now you're seeing the second tier companies where China's not a must win for them. They're going to come back in September, October.
Right.
So a lot of the international companies have been taking a wait and see attitude,
right,
on whether or not they should come back to China. They also had a lot of visa issues.
They did.
It has been an absolute nightmare,
yeah,
for the people China needs,
right,
to get back into China.
Right.
I don't understand what the visa policies are doing right now.
Right.
But the point of that meeting is that multinationals are saying in 2023, we're going to skip investing in China. They also make their annual plans for investment in November, December, and that's when we're still under lockdown here.
Right.
So what I think is going to happen is you only saw that FDI went up 2%.
Right.
In Q1 of this year over year. That's anemic because for part of Q1 last year, I was locked down in my house, unable to buy food.
Right.
So when you look at it, I think all these CEOs are going to start coming back by Q3.
Right.
Then they'll decide in November, December of this year whether to invest in China next year.
Yeah.
And that's also playing a major role on the weak consumer confidence, because companies see they work for multinational, they're just not expanding operations in China right now.
Yeah, no, it's a good insight, and I want to highlight just what you said earlier as well with the flights, because they are operating at 10% capacity. So I think a lot of people, when they decided to reopen the border, a lot of people thought, wow, China's open again. Like, let's just everything back to normal. But I mean, even we saw a lot of bearish views, even from the airlines, not opening up, saying, okay, let's wait a little bit. We're going to slowly open this up. But you're right. I mean, it's hard to get here. It's hard to get to China now. It's not as easy as it was, 4 years ago when you had, hundreds of flights every day, going to China. there's just a handful of now, and that's raised the cost. And I think everybody, it's gotten a lot longer. So I mean, hopefully we can see this turnaround. But I want to go to geopolitics, because I know you and I think we have a very similar view, in the sense that we're both from America. We both love our home country, but we also both love China, and we want to see a world where the United States and China are working together. Shaun, do you think that's possible right now?
Unfortunately, I don't see it being possible for the next 10, 20 years.
Yeah.
Now, Cyrus, you and I want to be bridge builders.
Right.
To me, I want to see America succeed economically.
Right.
A strong, stable America is good for America, and it's good for the world.
Right.
But I also believe that a strong, stable China is good for China, and it's good for the world. It's even better when the two countries cooperate.
Right.
The problem is, I don't think that the American government, whether you're Republicans or Democrats, are willing to allow China to continue to rise economically.
Right.
I think no matter what China does, whether China's Wang Yi or Qin Gang, the foreign secretary, meet with Blinken or not,
right,
the United States is going to criticize.
Right.
If China, if they have the Secretary of Defense meet with the Chinese Minister of Defense, it doesn't matter.
Right.
The United States is always going to criticize China at some point.
Right.
And so I think the Chinese government at this stage is saying, you know what, we should just ignore the United States. Who really cares? Let's just focus on building up relations with the global south.
Right.
And that's why you see, as soon as Xi took his third term as chairman,
right,
the first foreign leader he met was from Vietnam.
Right.
Now, Vietnam and China have always historically had tension, but he actually gave a friendship medal to the president of Vietnam. That was really big news.
Right.
He met with the presidents of Pakistan. Xi in December went to the GCC and helped broker a deal between Saudi Arabia and Iran.
Right.
In April, President Lula from Brazil visited China and said, you know what, maybe we should have a BRICS dollar.
Right.
We're definitely seeing over the next 10, 20 years de-dollarization,
right,
and I expect the RMB to become a reserve currency. So unfortunately, I don't think it's possible for US-China relations to get back on track anytime soon, unless, as crazy as it sounds, and I'm not a supporter of Trump,
right,
but Trump might be the only politician who could become president and say, I won the trade war with China, let's get back to business.
Right.
I think he might be the only one who could do that. Now, I'm not saying I would support Trump,
right,
but I think he's the only one who could go against the traditional warmongering ways of DC right now and
right,
try to put things back on track, because Biden had a chance to reset relations with China. He had a chance to say, you know what, the Trump era was an anomaly.
Right.
Now let's go back to, mutual respect, even if we have differences over values.
Right.
But I think Biden is treating China even worse than Trump did.
I agree, and I think that's been very surprising for us to see, because I think when, I remember when we were doing the 2020 election, even the message from China, China's foreign ministry had said, whoever wins this election, whether it's Biden or Trump, we hope that, we can look at a new page in US-China relations, and we will welcome the democratic result of America and embrace whoever that is. And I think when Biden came in, I remember making a vlog saying, I think this is going to be good for the for the future. And that was completely wrong. I mean, Biden in many ways has gotten much worse on China, and
much worse.
And the relationship has turned even more negative.
Part of Biden's problem is he actually appointed people like Eli Ratner, Kurt Campbell, who were the biggest hawks
right,
and anti-China folks in the Obama administration.
Right.
And he appointed them to prominent positions in the Biden regime.
Right.
And so these people feel that they're on almost a religious, ideological struggle against China and communism right now. It's
right,
very dangerous,
right,
because I think this sort of American exceptionalism,
right,
this belief, religious-like belief in democracy,
right,
is forcing the United States to denigrate China and
right,
conditioning the American population to hate China. You can see the Pew Center, have shown a lot of surveys where it's something like 70-80% of Americans now have a negative view of China.
That's right.
And that's really coming straight from DC and our American media,
right,
people who don't really understand China, even at the top publications. You have people like Gady Epstein,
right,
who was the bureau chief for The Economist in China. He doesn't speak Chinese.
Right.
You see Katie O'Keefe, who works for the Wall Street Journal. Her whole career has been covering US-China relations. She doesn't speak Chinese. She's never lived in China.
Right.
It's shocking the number of journalists at New York Times, Wall Street Journal, economists who focus on China as their career, who've never lived here and don't speak the language.
Right.
And so they're creating a skewed view of what China is. Now, that doesn't mean everything is perfect in China.
For sure.
There's definitely areas that I think people should criticize.
Right.
I was very critical of the implementation of zero COVID last year.
That's right.
Very, very critical.
Right.
Zero COVID itself was okay.
Right.
But implementation at the local level was an absolute disaster.
Right.
And I think we're still seeing the ramifications on that, on the economy,
right,
and on consumer confidence.
Yeah.
But the key, I think, Cyrus, is we need to have balanced, objective views of U.S.-China relations and China, and that show the good and the bad. And that's why I like this show.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Shaun, I really wanted to come here today to get these insights, and again, like I said at the beginning, no filter. I want you to just speak the truth, because it's important. I mean, this is really the main goal of me coming back to China that right now in 2023 was to meet people like you, see these stories on the ground, and really understand what's going on. I want to shift.
So then let me say that then,
Yeah.
to be very clear, I support Chairman Xi and I support the CPC.
Yeah.
I think in this day and age, it has to be very clear.
Yeah.
And I do want to be clear. I don't agree with all their policies.
Yeah.
I do agree with many of them.
Yeah.
So I generally do support.
Right.
But I think in this day and age, it's important that any of my criticisms are taken as trying to improve the party.
That's right.
Not to tear it down.
Right.
I think it is a very sensitive time, and sometimes I think a great superpower like China needs to get better at accepting criticism.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I would definitely agree with that. Shaun, would you say that, what about for local Chinese? Do you think that they have they started to lose confidence in the party, in Xi Jinping? Do you feel that the Chinese are still, what do you think?
So I think there's a difference.
Yeah.
Okay, when you go to the tier 1 cities,
Yeah.
And you go to the wealthier areas, their support of certain leaders are not as strong as
Right.
it would have before.
Right.
And that's because they've been hit by things like common prosperity.
Right.
They've been hit by the tech crackdown. And so we're definitely seeing a shift towards socialism.
Right.
Like we had earlier.
Right.
And so there's less avenues to make a lot of money. And that's getting a lot of the wealthier people and people in tier 1 cities upset.
Right.
And that's why you see a lot of capital outflows. You see a lot of wealthy Chinese trying to immigrate to Australia, to Singapore.
Right.
They are trying to move out.
Right.
But when you talk to people in 3rd, 4th, 5th tier cities,
Right.
and I've traveled to almost half of the provinces in the last 3 years. I was in Xinjiang 3 times. I went again after we did our last interview. I spent
Right.
a couple weeks there.
Okay.
I've been to Tibet. I've been to Hunan many, many times. Jiangxi, all over the country. When you go to 3rd, 4th, 5th tier cities, the support of Xi and the support of the party is as high, if not higher, than any time before.
Right.
Because he is making good implementation of policies that get better access to healthcare,
Right.
better access to education, and the infrastructure spend.
Right.
So I think you're seeing, less happiness amongst a certain tier of consumer for sure, but a lot of happiness from 3rd, 4th, 5th tier consumers. And I think that's a differentiation that you're not reading in the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal.
Right.
Because they're interviewing tech bros.
That's right.
They're interviewing people from Shanghai who suffered during the lockdown, and
Right.
we suffered.
Yeah.
But that's not representative of the whole country.
That's right.
So it's
Yeah.
important to do both. But
would
I think
agree.
that's a good question, and maybe I sidestepped the answer right a little bit,
No,
but
no,
it's
I
a
think-
very sensitive time.
I think you answered it really well, because I think that's exactly the sentiment that I felt, and I think that's one thing that maybe a lot of people in the West don't really understand, is just how diverse China is, and just how, it's hard. It's a country of 1.4 billion people, and there is, you can't just go to the cities of Shanghai and Beijing to get a feel of China. It takes that travel to all of these provinces, but going to the 2nd and 3rd and 4th and 5th tier cities to really have a view of that. And I would agree with that. I've been traveling to 3rd and 4th tier cities, and again, just to see the economic progress that those cities have had. If you're a 5th tier city, 20 years ago, you maybe only had one road. Now you have hospitals, multiple roads, better schools. There has been a very big improvement in life. And I think that's something that Western media often doesn't capture it all.
I'll give an example. So after we spoke, I took my son and we went to Xinjiang for a couple weeks.
Yeah.
So we spent a week doing aid work.
Yeah.
So we lived in a school in Xinjiang.
Nice.
We donated money, we donated time. We
Right.
lived at the school with the locals.
Nice.
And then we also traveled around and went to Kashgar. We had to cut our trip early because COVID was coming.
Right.
And it was very difficult for foreigners to get the green health code. We couldn't get the test results.
Right.
But when I was in Kashgar, I interviewed this Uyghur family, and they had several kids. And the mother said, you know what? Life is great. Because the oldest kid got a full, who was I think 16, got a full scholarship to travel to another province. I think it was in Jiangsu.
Okay.
And was able to study there for free for 4 years, his high school education.
Right.
Get educated in Mandarin, get educated from a top tier school in a top city, and have his huge opportunities open.
Right.
And so this Uyghur family in Kashgar told me that life is so much better now than it was 5-10 years ago. And it's all because of the party and the policies at enabling education. You could almost consider them akin to affirmative action in the United States, but I think it goes even farther. It's even more powerful and really empowers the local Uyghur families. Now, I asked his younger brothers, are you going to do the same program? And they all said, they hope to, because they've seen the benefits for their elder brother, and they just hope that they'll be able to, but they're not sure because their grades have to be at a certain level. You might call this in Western media, this is cultural genocide, or they might even call this genocide. I view this, and the Uyghur, and I interviewed Uyghur family, Kazakhstan families, you know, family after family viewed this as a net positive for their families. And these were people that I just was walking on the street and ran into and interviewed.
Fantastic. Well, Shaun, I think you've had some amazing insights here. I want to finish up with one final question. And, you know, right now in 2023, what do you want the world to know about China right now?
I'll put it this way. I think China is still very welcoming to foreigners.
100%.
So when I gave that speech to these Australian investors, they told me they were scared to come into China. They thought because of the political tension between Australia and China, that they would be treated poorly by everyday Chinese. They said they were so welcomed, people were friendly to them, and they were shocked. And I think that's what the reality is everyday Chinese and even the Chinese government is rolling open the red carpet to get foreign tourists, foreign businessmen, FDI back into China. China has normalized. It's still a great opportunity. Over the next 5 years, China is still going to be a major growth engine for even the largest companies. Come back, take a visit. Don't be scared. What you read in the Western press, what you hear from government officials like Tom Cotton or Josh Hawley is just jaded BS. Get the truth, come here, see what China's like on your own.
Absolutely. Well, that's been really the main focus of my trip back here. And Shaun, this has been so nice to finally sit down and meet you in person here in Shanghai.
Thanks for having
me. I really want to thank you for your time, but also your insights, because again, you're somebody that I really look to and that I trust for valuable information. You and your company are doing an amazing job, again, on the ground since 1997. Obviously speak the language here, and that's really puts you in a very good category to, you know, give us some objective truth on the situation. So Shaun, thank you so much.
Thank you, Cyrus.
Absolutely.
I want to thank Shaun for his time and meeting with me on my recent trip back to China. We covered a lot in just 20 minutes, but his insights are extremely valuable to anyone wanting to understand the real China in 2023. If you're interested in learning more about Shaun's travels through Xinjiang and Tibet, please click here to watch our previous video where Shaun shares the truth of what Xinjiang is really like. Everyone, my name is Cyrus. Thank you for spending time with me here today on YouTube, and I look forward to seeing you all in our next video soon.